Kukkura jataka. The Bodhisattva was once a dog who led a large pack living in a cemetery. One day, after the king had been out having fun in his royal park, he arrived back at the palace after sunset. So, his servants led the harness hitched to his luxurious chariot rather than putting it away. That night, the king's dog came down and gnawed the beautiful leatherwork. Certain that no purebred dog would misbehave like this, the king assumed dogs from outside the palace must have snuck in through the sewer and done it. Enraged, the king ordered all dogs other than his own killed. When the slaughter began in the city, many dogs fled to the cemetery and told the Bodhisattva what was happening. He knew that no city dogs could breach the palace walls, so it must have been the king's own. The Bodhisattva promised the other dogs he would save them. Then he set out to meet with the king. By focusing his mind on thoughts of love and the 10 perfections of character, he was able to freely walk the city streets and sneak into the palace unmolested. He and the king discussed the situation, and the Bodhisattva explained that since the king had ordered certain dogs spared, even though he did not know which dogs had actually gnawed the leather, he was following the 4 evil causes: partiality, dislike, ignorance, and fear. And this was unbecoming of a king. Recognizing that the Bodhisattva was wise, the king asked if he knew who the real culprits were. When the Bodhisattva told him it was his own purebreds, the king wanted proof. So the Bodhisattva gave it to him. He told the king to mash up some grass, mix it with buttermilk, and make his dogs eat it. When they vomited, out came bites of leather. Impressed, the king offered to let the Bodhisattva become king. Instead, the Bodhisattva asked that the king listen to a sermon on righteousness. When it was finished, the king was so moved that he commanded no living creatures be killed in his kingdom ever again, and that from then on all dogs be fed the same fancy food that he himself ate. In the lifetime of the Buddha, King Pasenadi, a righteous ruler and devoted supporter of the Buddha, always provided food for Buddha's disciples. But they did not stay and eat at the palace, because the people there were not friendly. When the king found out that they went to eat at their friends' homes, he decided to marry a woman from Buddha's Sakya clan in order to build closer relations with the Buddha and his disciples. However, the Sakya clan was arrogant and insular and did not want to marry into a relationship with the king. But because he was their leader, a request like this could not be refused without consequences. So they sent a daughter of a noble man born to a slave woman, and told King Pasenadi she was noble. Knowing the Sakya clan's reputation, the king's assistants wanted to be sure the woman they were taking back was truly noble born. So, the family faked eating a meal together as proof. This was done by having what was claimed to be a very important letter delivered to the father at the start of the meal. So, after taking just one bite, he sat at the table reading rather than eating. This made it appear that he had denied with his daughter. But since he didn't actually eat, he didn't degrade himself with the slave. King Pasenadi truly loved his new consort and made her his chief queen. Soon a son was born, and he grew up receiving all the advantages a prince deserved, except he did not get gifts from his maternal grandfather's family. Not wanting her son to know about her life, his mother lied and told him they sent nothing because they lived very far away. Once he grew up, he decided to visit his other family, and though she tried, his mother could not stop him. Upon learning the prince was coming, the Sakya clan sent all their noble children younger than him away to the countryside, so nobody would need to bow down in respect in someone born from a slave. A few days later, when the prince was leaving, one of his soldiers overheard a Sakya slave saying the prince's mother had been a slave. Now, knowing how the Sakyas had disrespected both his mother and him, the prince vowed to destroy them when he became king. When King Pasenadi heard the news about his wife, he was furious and gave her his son nothing more than he gave to his other slaves. But a few days later, the Buddha, while admitting that his clan did wrong, explained to the king that his queen and son were children of royal men, and other mother's birth was irrelevant. The king changed his mind and restored their honor. The wife of King Pasenadi's commander-in-chief had never borne him a son, so he sent her back to her family. Accepting her fate, she went to pay respect to the Buddha before departing, and he told her not to go. Elated by his counsel, she went home and told her husband. The commander-in-chief figured the Buddha must have a good reason for it and let her stay. Soon after, she got pregnant. She told her husband she wanted to bathe in and drink the holy water used for ceremonial sprinkling by the families of kings from another clan. So he took her to the well in his chariot. Once there, the commander-in-chief fought off the guards and broke through the iron net, and they both bathed in the holy water before fleeing the city. Furious about this egregious violation, 500 kings ignored the warnings from their spiritual advisor that the commander-in-chief would slay them all and chased after him in their chariots. The commander-in-chief waited for all 500 chariots to line up just right, Then he shot an arrow with his special bow, 1,000 times stronger than a regular bow, and it passed through all 500 kings right at the point where they fastened their belts. The kings did not notice their injuries and continued pursuit until the commander-in-chief stopped his chariot and shouted at them that they were already dead. Still standing and feeling fine, the kings thought he was crazy. But he told them to loosen one man's belt, and upon doing so, the man fell over dead. The commander-in-chief told the other men to go home and set their affairs in order before taking off their armor, and they all did, dying when they were ready. Over time, the commander-in-chief's wife gave birth to twin boys 16 times. All 32 of their sons grew up to be heroic and perfect in every way. One day, some men who lost a court case appealed with the commander-in-chief to help them because they felt that the judges were corrupt. He looked into the matter and found that the judges really were corrupt. So he judged the men's case himself and sided with them. The city's citizens applauded his intervention, and when King Pasenadi learned about it, he put the commander-in-chief in charge of the court system. But the judges lost so much money by not being able to take bribes that they told the king his commander-in-chief was planning to overthrow him. Believing this lie, the king decided he must kill him. He hired some men to pillage towns in a border region and sent his commander-in-chief and all 32 of his sons to capture these bandits. King Pasenadi also ordered some of his soldiers to be headed the commander-in-chief and his sons while they were away, and they did. When she learned her husband and son's execution, the commander-in-chief's wife summoned all 32 daughters-in-law and told them not to be angry or upset, though their husbands were pure and innocent now. This must have resulted from misdeeds in their former lives. Seeking revenge would be a sin, even worse than the King Pasenadi's spies reported this meeting to him. And after hearing about their reaction, he was overcome with remorse. The king went to see the Buddha, and while he was away from the palace, his new commander-in-chief, angry about the assassination, pulled a cork and put a half-slave prince on the throne. King Pasenadi vowed to reclaim his kingship and set out for his city, hoping to muster some troops. He arrived after the gates had been closed for the evening and had to spend the night in a shed. Weak from traveling far and fast in the sun and wind, he died of expose her that night. The new king had never forgotten his grudge against the Sakya clan for their disrespect, and now he could finally get revenge. He set out with a large army to their territory. The Buddha divined what was happening and wanted to save his clan. He went to the border and sat under a small tree that provided little shade. When the king came to this area, he stopped to greet the Buddha and asked why he didn't sit under the large shade banyan tree nearby. The Buddha answered that the shade of his family kept him cool. The king understood this meant the Buddha was there to protect his clan, so he returned around. The king later set out on the warpath twice more, and both times the Buddha sat under the same tree, causing the king to back down. After stopping the king's rampage for the third time, the Buddha heard some of his disciples talking about how great he was for protecting his clan. He told them this story so they knew that he had also done good things for his family in the past. Later, the king set out a fourth time, hoping to destroy the Sakya clan. This time, the Buddha decided that because of his clan's sins, he would not protect them anymore. The king's army slayed everyone they met, starting with babies, then returned to the palace. The king was an earlier birth of Ananda, one of the Buddha's top disciples, and the city's dogs were earlier births of Buddha's present followers. Moral of the story: do not judge based on appearance or birth. The king initially believed the palace purebreds were innocent and the street dogs were guilty simply based on their perceived status and where they lived. The Buddha later had to remind King Pasenadi that his wife and son's worth was based on their royal lineage through the father, not the mother's social class. True worth is not determined by birth or social class. Revenge and hatred leads to suffering. The commander-in-chief's wife, after her husband and sons were unjustly executed, chose not to seek revenge, recognizing that such action would only create worse karma. Similarly, the half-slave princess consuming grudge against the Sakya clan eventually led him to a destructive path, and clan's own arrogance, the initial sin of disrespecting the king, brought about their ultimate destruction. The story underscores that hatred is never appeased by hatred. It is appeased by love. Avoid the four evil causes. The Bodhisattva, the cemetery dog, directly criticizes the king for following the four evil causes: partiality, dislike, ignorance, and fear. A wise ruler or any person must be impartial and base decisions on truth and evidence, not on prejudices or emotions. The unavoidable nature of karma. The death of a commander-in-chief and his sons, despite their present innocence, was explained by the wise wife as the result of misdeeds in a former life. This is a central theme in many Jataka tales. What you experience today is often the fruit of your actions in the past.